maybe I'll go ahead and get us started. I think that our PowerPoint is now running. First page, just a couple of slides that I want to show while we get underway and get our panelists teed up. You might have been surprised that we elected to continue with this event just a few months ago. So many activities were canceled, postponed, set aside while we deal with and tackle the COVID-19 pandemic, but we decided to push forward. And we elected to continue to show our commitment to responding to the global climate crisis, which we have created, to recognize that this crisis deserves the same sense of urgency that we're committing to winning the battle against the global pandemic. So here we are, all in virtual reality across the nation, focusing on what we can do about climate change over the next 10 years, solving the climate crisis by 2030. So I teach at the Georgia Institute of Technology, and we're hosting this event in Georgia, but we're not alone. We have university participants all across the state, and we have a slew of students and volunteer workers helping to manage this complicated Blue Jeans meeting. Perhaps most notable is Allison Laura, who is a master's student at Georgia Tech, and she has put together this event with assistance from her colleagues as well. So I'll be moderating the Georgia Power Dialog, and we're going to begin with a national video by Eben Goldstein, and he is going to kick off with a perspective, a vantage point from which Eben works, looking over the Catskill Mountains in northern New York. So, Allison, can you turn that intro video on?
Sure thing, here it comes.
Yeah.
Welcome to Solve Climate by 2030. Today, universities in almost all 50 U.S. states, Puerto Rico, D.C., and several other countries are hosting state and region-wide webinars focused on ambitious and feasible things that we can all do in our cities, our towns, and states in the coming year to really move the needle on climate change. Here is the most important idea to take home today. What you do locally will change the future. Fact. The U.S. state of Georgia is a top 10 solar state. The neighboring Sunshine State of Florida has very little solar power due to outdated laws and regulations. When we launched Solve Climate a year ago, we could never have imagined that today, entire countries and much of the world's economy would be shut down, with hundreds of thousands of people ill, thousands having passed away, and our health systems overwhelmed. I take that back. We could easily have imagined this. Our health experts and scientists warned us this was coming. After SARS and MERS, they told us this was coming, and yet we didn't take preventive action, we didn't prepare. COVID-19 has shown how fragile our health and economic systems are to extreme events. Our scientists have told us clearly that unchecked, climate change will turn our lives into an unending series of extreme events. Floods, droughts, rising sea levels, pests and disease, more extreme storms and hurricanes, all of this leaving hundreds of millions of people homeless and on the move. We can change this. We still have time to change that future. Last year, the world's top climate scientists told us that we have until 2030, 10 years now, to cut global warming pollution aggressively in order to stabilize the climate at the low end. That warning was the genesis for this national and international discussion today on how to solve climate by 2030. Solving climate in 10 years, that sounds challenging. And yet fixing the energy half of climate change by 2030 is looking more, not less likely than it was 4 years ago. The cost of solar and wind power, batteries, and electric vehicles have plummeted. In many cases, they are less expensive now than the fossil fuel power that causes global warming, and they are getting cheaper every day. Already, utility-scale wind and solar, big solar and wind farms that feed power into the grid, these technologies are crushing fossil fuels in much of the U.S. In Colorado, Idaho, and California, renewable bids are coming in at half the price that the cheapest fossil fuel plants can do. And this is where rooftop solar and battery systems are headed in the near future. On the vehicles front, all the major manufacturers see this coming. Mercedes-Benz announced last fall that they have designed their last gasoline-powered car. Going forward, every new model of theirs will be electric. Combining electric-powered vehicles with the impact of driverless technology, we could see a very rapid transition away from gasoline-based cars to EVs in the next decade. All this progress was the result of a major technology push by national governments. Starting in America in the 70s and then ramping up with the Danes, the British, the Japanese and Koreans, the Germans, and most recently the Chinese and Indians, government policies have brought these industries to scale. And now the market is taking over, and renewables, battery storage, and electric vehicles are on track to deliver power and transportation at prices unsubsidized that will lead to major disruptions of energy markets in the 2020s. Can we get there fast enough to solve climate? Well, this is where you come in. With plummeting prices for renewables and electric-powered transports, the pace of the clean energy revolution will no longer be determined by Washington, D.C. and other national governments. Instead, the core action is going to be in your city, at your electric utility, and in your state capital. The key to solving climate by 2030 will be clearing the path at the local level to rapid deployment of solar, wind, battery storage, and electric vehicles. We need to get rid of outmoded laws and regulations that are holding back the transition. Florida needs to take the lesson from Georgia. It's imperative that we have justice in this transition. We have to make sure that the millions of green jobs that are created are jobs for all, and that everyone has access to clean, affordable power and mobility. Today, in Nebraska and New Jersey, in Idaho and Alabama, in Bangladesh and Brazil, we're going to find out what are 3 ambitious but feasible things that we can do right at home to smooth the path for clean energy and to bring energy justice to our communities. Following the webinar, I hope you will join a group or class discussion about what you can do to make these solutions real. Then, what next? Well, this summer, young people in particular have a terrific opportunity to both support climate solutions and gain valuable job skills in a down economy. The most powerful thing you can do to solve climate by 2030 is to join the political campaign of a candidate who best represents your views on climate solutions. In doing that, you'll also learn how to communicate, you'll gain courage, and most importantly, be part of a creative, strong, powerful vision for the future. COVID-19 is giving us a stark lesson about what happens when we ignore warnings from science. Today, we'll see how 10 years can be enough time to drive the climate solutions that we need, and that the future will be what we make it. Thank you for the work you will do to solve climate.
To Dr. Kim Cobb next, who's going to inspire us with some reasons why we should pay attention to climate change. She's an atmospheric scientist who teaches at the Georgia Institute of Technology, and she leads the Global Change program here. Kim, what do you think?
Thanks so much, Marilyn. And thanks to all of you for joining in community during this ongoing crisis that we're all going through. It's wonderful to see some old and friendly faces, and great to see so many new names in the chat, and to look forward to building and continuing to build our community. Of course, I was supposed to welcome you into the beautiful Candida building for this event, which, if you haven't been to at Georgia Tech, is a stunning example of, I hope, where we're headed with a beautiful and inspiring low-carbon future that we know is out on the horizon and has been brought to Georgia Tech's campus. Check it out. It's very beautiful. However, this is, of course, a virtually carbon-free event that we are hosting tonight. And so what a great opportunity to also envision a role for this kind of technology in helping to build a low carbon community going forward. And so there are, of course, some very, very important synergies between the COVID-19 crisis and ongoing pandemic and, of course, the pressing crisis of climate change that we've been discussing for a lot longer than that. And so as a climate scientist, these parallels are quite stark to me. Most importantly, I think, as was already stated in the video, it really starts with the science. And that has been the foundation of the approach to climate solutions across the international community. And it, of course, it is the foundation for decision making around the COVID-19 crisis. But it doesn't end with the science, does it? It really requires a bold and aggressive leadership. It requires early and decisive action. And it requires the active participation of all of us to lend our individual contributions towards a collective vision for reducing collective risk. And that is very, very clearly illustrated in these last couple of weeks, how we can, based on scientific recommendations, when we have responsible leadership and we can solve a global scale challenge on a time scale of, well, we'll see, but several months to several years, I'll take that. Quite a ringing endorsement for individuals coming together around collective goals. And so I wanted to also note that, of course, while much of our global activities have been put on pause, we, of course, have climate change raging forward around the world right now. And I wanted to call into the room some of the latest headlines that you may not have even seen because they've been drowned out, just to sharpen our focus on some of what is going on outside of the pandemic. Number one, we had Cyclone Harold barrel into the Vanuatu community in the last day, Category 5 storm, reminding us that, of course, hurricane season is upon us as well very soon here in Georgia and across much of the southeastern United States, bringing very serious issues of compound threats to communities that are already reeling from the current pandemic crisis. So there will probably be no break from the kinds of compound extremes and challenges that threaten the very fabric, the very systems on which we depend for our health and safety and well-being, not just economically, but also, of course, from lives and livelihoods perspective. And of course, late breaking just yesterday was the news from the Great Barrier Reef that this has been the most widespread coral bleaching event across the Great Barrier Reef in recorded history, falling on the heels of two similarly large-scale events in 2016 and 2017. So an unprecedented spate of threats to one of the most iconic and most ecologically keystone structures of our entire planet, as we know. And so coming back home here to Georgia, though, I'm involved with a project on the coast and just wanted to share some of the chatter that's been going on down on the coast around the fear for the coming hurricane season as it overlaps and overlays with the pandemic. And I wanted to also recognize, as the video stated, the important role for climate justice in helping shape a very proactive response to these kind of compound crises. Already seeing some interesting threads out there concerning the acute vulnerability of low-income residents and communities of color in particular as well to the COVID-19 pandemic, the very same people and communities that are going to be most impacted by the kinds of climate extremes that we face here in Georgia, not just coastal flooding, but of course urban heat extremes as well, and many other kinds of threats. And so the economic well-being of our state, the physical well-being of our state is at stake in both of these crises. And unfortunately, they are going to come down in a very compound way. And so that highlights and kind of encapsulates, I hope, some of the liabilities that we face, not just around the globe, but also here at home in Georgia. But of course, by the same token, we have a huge opportunity. And this is the joint and kind of twofold message that is part of really the DNA of what is a core exercise of Georgia Tech, Emory, and UGA called the Georgia Climate Project, which is the umbrella of the work that we're going to discuss today for Georgia Drawdown, and really represents the idea that Georgia is poised to be a leader in climate action. And when I say that, everybody who may know a lot about the history of this business may have a slight chuckle. But I think the video illustrates some of the bright spots having to do with our solar deployment, our EV deployment, the ways in which we are coming together across institutions and across sectors and across disciplines to bring the best and the brightest and the boldest visions forward, and to make sure that we have the proper capacity and the proper collaborations to accelerate forward. And so I'm really quite honored to be part of the Georgia Drawdown project with my colleagues across Georgia Tech, UGA, and Emory, and of course part of the Georgia Climate Project as well, which is a network that extends way beyond those institutions to include a network of higher education and academic institutions across the state. Again, building that foundation, building that network, building that capacity so that we can accelerate Georgia's impact in both climate solutions on the adaptation side and, as we'll discuss in depth today, on the mitigation side. So with that, I believe I've well exhausted my time that Marilyn had allotted, and I will turn it back to her.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you so much. Allison, can you go ahead and put up our agenda for the upcoming hour or so? And while we're getting ready for the panelists to speak about policy initiatives, I wanted to say a little bit about this Drawdown Georgia project that Kim mentioned. And one of the reasons I thought it ought to be one of the first topics that we discuss is because it can debunk the myth that we don't have the solutions available yet. There are a lot of people that suggest that we just need more engineering and more technology. I know, being at Georgia Tech, you can never have too much science and technology, but at the same time, there's a lot that we can do right now. So if you go to this next slide, the purpose of the Georgia Drawdown project is to identify what is available, what are the most promising solutions to achieve carbon neutrality in Georgia in the short term, what's available in the here and now. And what we've discovered, you could go ahead to the next slide, that our toolbox is full. We had looked at more than 100 solutions that were nominated by the global project called Project Drawdown. And we asked which of those 100s might work for the state of Georgia. They fall into different segments and sectors of the economy, and one of them tackles solutions for fossil fuel emission reductions in the generation of electricity. Some tackle the emissions from transportation, and others from the built environment. So these are the sort of three standard sectors that we deal with when we're asking what are our solutions. In the electricity sector, solar is an obvious winning approach, both rooftop and on solar farms. And in transportation, electric vehicles, once you've decarbonized that electric sector, then electric vehicles are a form of transportation that can essentially be carbon free. We need to consider alternative mobility too. There's the biking and the walking and all of the healthy repercussions from a more active lifestyle, retrofitting our buildings, recycling, and waste management. Those are the traditional three sectors. I wanted to point to the upper right-hand corner of this PowerPoint, which will be posted on our website. And it directs you to a report that we've just published that describes 21 high potential policy solutions for Georgia. And in the lower left-hand corner, we have 2 pages written about each of the 100 solutions that we evaluated. So it's a veritable gold mine. It's one of these cases where we really have the vaccine. It does not have to be developed. We've got the antidotes. We know how to handle this. There's a lot of technology out there, and it's ready to be deployed. If you turn to the next page, we have some unique opportunities in the state of Georgia because our natural systems are able to absorb so much CO2. 60% of the landmass of Georgia is in forests. And if we can protect those forests, or indeed if we can expand them, then that will be a source of carbon mitigation. And then in the food sector and agriculture, so much we can do in terms of managing our food waste and in conservation agriculture, composting, and managing our diets, right? So more vegetation in our diets and less meat. But so now you've seen some of these high potential solutions. What we now need are policies that can transform the economy and the society in such a way to bring these to scale. Now, how far are we in achieving this penetration of new and promising technologies? If you go to the next slide, you'll see we at Georgia Tech like our numbers. And so I apologize that you're going to see a lot of numbers now. You're going to see where we stand in the world relative to our emissions. We've got the totals there, the world at 33 trillion tons of CO2 each year and 4 metric tons per person each year. That's 1/4 the average of the U.S. The American average American that's responsible for something like 16 metric tons of CO2 a year, the equivalent of throwing about 4 or 5 cars worth of CO2 in terms of the weight equivalent of what we consume, every one of us. In the state of Georgia, we're a little bit better than the average American at 13.6 tons per person. And in the Atlanta metro area, even better. But the city of Atlanta has its challenges ahead of us. And so I'm so glad that Neela Ram is going to let us know what Atlanta has in store. So if we go back to our agenda, you can see that we have organized the discussion so that Nathaniel Smith can carry on Eben's comments about the need for equitable solutions. Neela Ram, the climate advisor of the city of Atlanta, will tell us about what the city plans to do. Shane Totten, who's with Southface Institute, will discuss some of the state legislative initiatives, and Tim Echols, Vice Chairman of the Georgia Public Service Commission, will round out our panel with a discussion of the utility sector, utility initiatives. So with that, I'd like to turn the podium, virtual podium, over to Nathaniel Smith, founder and CEO of the Partnership for Southern Equity.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, and my esteemed panelists for giving me an opportunity to not only participate on this panel, but to also have a chance to speak first. Unfortunately, on many occasions, when we have conversations about equity in particular, that conversation is usually an add-on or the last perspective that is provided in a conversation like this. And so I want to take the time to acknowledge my sincere appreciation for being provided an opportunity to share. And unfortunately, the example that I've given is consistent on many occasions with the way that vulnerable communities are usually elevated within the context of this energy conversation. On many occasions, the marginalized, even though they are impacted the most and have the potential to benefit the most from a clean energy transition, are usually the ones that are often forgotten as it relates to policy decision making. The COVID-19 scare, and I also meant to say that I hope that everyone on this call is somewhere safe and secure, and we hope that you all are taking care of yourselves. But unfortunately, the COVID-19 virus is another prime example of how policy making, and in particular, the decisions that have been made in the past that have in many ways not only affected vulnerable communities, in many ways have not only exacerbated the challenges that they're facing, but at the same time, the energy challenges that we face are another prime example of that. So even though they may seem separate in terms of the COVID-19 situation and the challenges that we face around moving toward a clean energy future, both of them are connected by history. I tell people all the time that the greatest difference between equity and equality is history. The same way that we can talk about how redlining, bad transportation policies, and bad economic policies and other policies have created the conditions for vulnerable populations to not only be in a position to reach their full potential, but to also be affected by social health determinants now that, as the data is showing, has positioned them to be hurt the most and die more frequently around COVID-19. We can also say that around our climate policy making that has, of course, created the conditions for not only extreme extraction that on many occasions has utilized the labor of vulnerable communities to drive our dirty economy. And if we're not careful, those same communities will be positioned to not benefit and not be a part of this transition to a clean energy economy, but also have been hurt as a result of us not being willing to invest in the ways that we need to invest to ensure that equity, not just science, but equity is at the center of the conversations around transforming our energy systems in a way that is more equitable and green. When individuals live in homes, in communities that have some of the highest energy burdens in the country, like in the city of Atlanta, where people have to choose between buying groceries or paying their utility bills, we should not be comfortable with that. When we have individuals that live in housing that is inefficient, and as a result of that, they have air issues as it relates to asthma and other health issues that again position them to be susceptible to COVID-19, we should not be comfortable with that. When we've had an opportunity to have a comprehensive transportation system in metropolitan Atlanta, but many suburban counties choose not to accept MARTA because they're afraid that African Americans will move into those counties, we should not be comfortable with that. And so until we're able to own our history and own how we got here, and even more so, not continue to provide a level of lip service as it relates to energy justice and not understanding and being truthful and embracing the reality that many of the solutions that we're talking about, poor people in particular can't afford. So we talk about solar, when we talk about EV, when we talk about all of these other things that are great in moving us towards a clean energy economy, what are we going to do to ensure that those same communities that we've leveraged to drive our economy for the past 400 years are now in a position to be a part of the clean energy economy that we're pushing towards? And the primary way to do that on many occasions is to make sure that when we are talking about power, we're also looking at power from the perspective of growing the civic capacity of the same communities that need to be at the table when these decisions are made and not on the menu. And right now, on many occasions, we have our elected officials who are not necessarily sensitive to the needs as relates to many challenges that vulnerable communities in particular are facing as relates to our energy present, and even more so, how those challenges could be potentially be exacerbated as we transition to a clean energy future if we're not committed to advancing a just transition. And so as an organization, the Partnership of Southern Equity is working with over 20 organizations around the state. Some of those organizations are actually on this call to begin the process of advancing a policy agenda that will put vulnerable communities and communities of color at the center of energy decision making. Not because we're asking for our elected officials to do the right thing, but to remind those elected officials that they work for us. And if those elected officials work for us, then they need to listen to all communities to ensure that everyone is benefiting from it. So from the work that we've had a chance to do recently around the rate case, attempting to work with various organizations around encouraging the Public Service Commission to not increase utility rates, to our deep concern about Plant Vogtle, and not only the health effects of Plant Vogtle, but the effects of the cost of ratepayers as we move towards Plant Vogtle, to us working to train communities who've been left behind in the political process through our Just Energy Academy, where we are training leaders in the future, to the work that you'll hear a little bit about that we're doing with the city of Atlanta and other municipalities about ensuring that the acknowledgement of structural racism and how it is at play in creating and minimizing an opportunity for a clean energy future must be considered when clean energy policy is being implemented and developed on a municipal level. And of course, our work around engaging rural electric co-ops and working with community residents to engage in those particular conversations. So again, one of the primary reasons why we feel this juxtaposition between energy power and political power is so important is that at the middle of that is the middle P, and that is policy. And on many occasions, policy, in essence, is just a reflection of the values of people in power. We've got to begin the process of influencing the values that are influencing public policy by ensuring that all people, in particular vulnerable communities and communities of color, are at the center of policy decision making as relates to energy, and even more so are positioned to benefit from the economic prosperity and technology that will come as a result of that transition. And I'll stop there.
Marilyn, you're muted, I think.
Yeah, take yourself off of mute, Dr. Brown.
Yes, thank you for those comments. And pleased to have you kick off the discussion and also then come back to these points later. So we'll do a full circle, okay? We will not forget all of these issues. In the meantime, though, Neela Ram will tell us about what the city of Atlanta is up to.
Hello, everyone. My name is Neela Ram, and I am the Climate Advisor with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And in this role, I am embedded in the Office of Sustainability's team with the Mayor's Office for One Atlanta. I'm tasked with helping the city shepherd through targeted policies that are focused on achieving carbon reductions. And the city does have a keen eye on policies and programs that have high value and impact and can be implemented in the near term. Allison, we can go to the next slide. We can go to the next slide, Allison. So a basic priority in city's climate challenge. So in an effort to assist ambitious U.S. cities, he seeks to accelerate efforts to tackle. We can go back one. So the ACCC seeks to accelerate efforts to tackle climate change and sustainable future. In 2019, Bloomberg Philanthropies introduced the ACCC, and Atlanta was chosen as one of 25 cities across the country to participate in this two-year initiative. And through a national network of experts, Atlanta has identified actions that would ultimately lower carbon emissions and push the city towards a more resilient and sustainable future. And through this challenge, the city is able to leverage knowledge and expertise to help them implement these actions and work through issues commonly associated with climate change mitigation, especially in the buildings and transportation sector. And I'll go over a few of the actions, but I wanted to give you a highlight of all the various initiatives that the city is looking to impact. For example, decarbonization, code enforcement, sidewalk connectivity, and parking policy. Go to the next slide. So one of the actions I'll touch on today is energy efficiency in commercial buildings, specifically the Commercial Buildings Energy Efficiency Ordinance. Before I go into detail, I do want to mention that all of the cities in the challenge have considered passing similar ordinances. Studies have shown that when cities rank various policy prescriptions, benchmarking rises to the top of the list, both in terms of value and impact. Atlanta was fortunate to have already passed this ordinance before the challenge began, and we're working really hard on optimizing compliance. So back to the action. This ordinance was passed by City Council back in 2015, and it requires all commercial and multifamily buildings to undergo an energy audit. And the city is currently leveraging resources through the ACCC to improve compliance rates and educate building owners on financial benefits to energy audits. Specifically, the policy focuses on benchmarking. You can't manage what you don't measure, and just by having buildings track their energy usage, some cities have 6% decrease. In terms of transparency, Atlanta wants to drive the commercial buildings to a more efficient marketplace. If potential owners and leasers can understand energy usage of a site, they can make more informed decisions. Previously, such data was unobtainable to the broader public, but by incorporating transparency into reporting requirements, the real estate market has one more data point to consider when evaluating a building. And one of the city's successes is making energy audits that are conducted by a professional made publicly available. And through the ACCC, we're working to increase compliance with these requirements. Additionally, these efforts can produce hundreds of millions of dollars in benefits to the private sector and can drive direct investment in our local community. Last year's numbers are encouraging. The city, with the help of ACCC, was able to see a 40% compliance rate. We're hoping to continue that increase in compliance with the help of local partnerships using more outreach and technical assistance. We can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned previously, the Office of Sustainability is in the Mayor's Office of One Atlanta, and a guiding principle for the Office of One Atlanta is equity. To that end, the sustainability team targeted actions within the challenge that would seek to address equity, energy burden, and housing affordability. Energy burden is defined as the percentage of household income spent on energy costs, both for electricity and natural gas. A reasonable energy burden is at or below 6%, and in Atlanta, over 75,000 low-income households are currently in energy. And we're seeing some communities that are paying more than 10% of their take-home pay, not gross pay, take-home pay to keep the lights on. Energy burden does have a lot of spillover effects. We see higher rates of eviction and higher incidences of health issues like asthma. In other words, addressing energy burden is also critical to public health and equity. The city is exploring how to implement energy efficiency retrofits in these highest energy burden zip codes, while also having naturally occurring housing affordability. And the agency is providing research and expertise on replicable and scalable programs with the hope that it will ultimately expand within the city and also statewide. So one thing that the city is looking at is focusing on auditing a select number of households to identify energy efficiency retrofits to be installed at a larger scale in homes with similar characteristics. All right. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So COVID-19 has provided an interesting opportunity to look at internal resources, innovation, and telework policy. Currently, the city is reviewing internal policies and programs to improve efficiencies and to engage in transportation and demand management. So what is transportation demand management, or TDM? TDM is the idea that we can apply policies or strategies to reduce overall travel demand or redistribute how people travel through various modes, ideally towards more efficient means of travel. Some strategies in TDM toolbox include transit benefits for commuters, like a MARTA pass, or a telework policy that pushes fewer people to commute into a physical office, or improving biking and pedestrian infrastructure to get more people out of their cars. The city, in partnership with ACCC, is evaluating various programs like expanding bus lanes, improving pedestrian networks, and improving last mile connectivity. We're also looking at how parking policies can be used to influence the rate of single occupancy vehicle travel. The city understands that this doesn't happen in a vacuum and is leveraging existing partnerships with regional and state partners to support best practices. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the slide, the city is also looking internally to develop a robust program so that they can be a beacon on the hill when they look to expand requirements through policies that reach beyond City Hall. Last slide. So I just want to end on this note that the vision for One Atlanta is to demonstrate to the world the power of aligning strong leadership with collaborative action, building an affordable, resilient, and equitable Atlanta. The American City's climate challenge is the perfect example of how the city is leveraging resources, leadership, expertise, the dedication to reducing carbon emissions while also promoting a resilient and thriving.
Thank you, Neela. You've generated a lot of questions. So when you start to look at your chat box and the question dialogue, you're going to see very interesting comments. Thank you so much. Shane, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you.
All
right. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for taking time to join us. Just a little forewarning that the defenses have been breached by the K9 residents, so I'm doing my best to fend them off without getting out of the chair. So I'm going to talk about two bills that are before the Georgia legislature right now. And they caught Southface's attention because we believe there's a lot of potential within them. The first one is House Bill 1015, and it's an update to the existing carbon sequestration registry. So if you aren't aware, Georgia actually has a carbon registry. And this bill would update it to include building materials that sequester carbon. A great example of that would be mass timber that we're going to talk about. The Candida building at Georgia Tech that Kim mentioned earlier has primary construction out of mass timber. The update would also include an advisory committee to create rules and regulations of that registry. And it also defines forests as having 10% canopy cover. That's a little detail that's going to be really important, I think, for a lot of communities to leverage because it allows a lot of folks to enter the carbon registry game. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. House Bill 777 investigates the addition of tall mass timber buildings to the state's building code. So what the legislation actually proposes is to create a study committee that would be sponsored by the Department of Community Affairs, and they're the state agency that manages the building codes for the state. And they will investigate the feasibility of adding tall wood buildings to our allowable building codes. So think skyscrapers made out of wood, particularly mass timber. So I'm an architect, and I'm really excited about the potential that these two bills contain. And while the bills aren't perfect, and Southface is not actually endorsing them at the moment, we believe that there is a lot of opportunity to improve the built environment, that holistic solutions for people, planet, and profit, the triple bottom line, can be achieved with thoughtful implementation of these two bills and their intent. So Southface believes that these bills will help drive Georgia's necessary transition to a regenerative economy. And this is usually where the blank stare starts. What's a regenerative economy? Well, if you're familiar with a circular economy, the notion is that there's basically a closed loop of materials, and those materials are used over and over and over with minimal waste leaving the loop and minimum nutrients coming into the loop. So think about an aluminum can. Once it's actually extracted and created into aluminum, it can be recycled over and over and over endlessly. Now, while there's an energy burden that goes along with that, that pretty much defines a circular economy. So a regenerative economy is one in which the outputs of that circle grow with each cycle. So a good example of that would be a couple of billion years ago, the planet Earth was cosmic dust, and it began to swirl, densify, and it created an orb. And that orb was a lifeless piece of rock. Today, it supports millions and millions and millions of species. And over the millennia, the capacity of the planet to sustain life with the same amount of resources has grown. So the outcomes are far greater than the inputs required to achieve them. Southface believes that the economy of the South and really of the world needs to become a regenerative one along with carbon neutrality by 2030. If we are to sustain ourselves as a species and we are to sustain ourselves in a way that we find desirable, we have to achieve regenerative economic status. So these two bills, what do they have to do with the regenerative economy? I've just lost everything.
We can still hear and see you, so just keep going, Shane.
Okay, great. All right, sorry, everything blacked out. I'm not sure what just happened. So House Bill 1015 is mass timber. And the idea, carbon registry. So the idea is that the resources of Georgia, both the forestry resources and building materials that sequester carbon, so basically wood products, but there are also some flooring products coming out of North Georgia that are embodying carbon in their materials. The idea is that these can be registered into the state's carbon registry. Now, that's really groundwork for a carbon market. And what a carbon market is the selling and trading of carbon credits. So as energy caps and carbon caps are introduced in different cities or countries, people who do projects that produce too much carbon can actually buy these credits to offset their overages. So it's an offset program in a sense, but buildings and other resources that sequester carbon can put credits onto the market and they can sell them. And so we believe that there's a lot of opportunity to leverage Georgia's forestry. We're the largest forestry state in the nation in terms of products. We can actually leverage that as well as other canopy cover. So that 10% I mentioned earlier, think about all of the parks in the city of Atlanta. Think about the Emory campus and all of the higher ed campuses around the state. When they hit that 10%, they can actually start registering credits that would then be sold on the market. So they're creating economic revenue by maintaining canopy cover. And so there is an incentive to maintain canopy cover and then to also use these building products that would be sequestering carbon and then would get put into the buildings. Now, as a point of reference, concrete and steel are our typical building materials in Georgia. And each one of those emits about the same amount of carbon as the global airline industry worldwide. So that's annual emissions. And so introducing mass timber, and if you don't know what mass timber is, it's just engineered wood that's large panels, they're structurally sound, and when combined with other engineered wood products, you can build tall buildings with it. They're actually using material that sequesters carbon and holds it in place as long as that building material stays intact. And so we believe that the intent of House Bill 1015 really creates a lot of economic opportunity, it creates a lot of environmental opportunity, and it creates a lot of equity opportunity. This could bring jobs to Georgia, manufacturing plants to create these mass timber products that would then be entered into the registry and used in the region. So you've got a win-win between mass timber as well as the carbon registry. So we think that while they're not perfect, we believe that there's a lot of great intent within these that will drive the economy of Georgia forward in a way that leads us to carbon neutrality by 2030, and then hopefully manages our building stock to become net positive over the next 60 years. And so we are looking forward to how these move through the General Assembly when it reconvenes, so that we can get on with moving towards this neutrality. That I'll turn it back over.
Those are two great initiatives, Shane. Thanks for sharing those with us. And our last panelist is Tim Echols. You know, everyone who's spoken so far has had such a career already of making a very big difference. And of course, Tim Echols is one of those. So I look forward to hearing what he has in mind going forward, having done so much in the past.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Dr. Brown. Hello, everyone. Great chats going on, good questions. Kim talked about the importance of a joint effort, the academy, scientists at EPD, political leaders who essentially can rally their own troops, their own constituents, and then regulators like me and my colleagues who have the ability to compel the utility. Dr. Brown talked about, the generation side, transportation side, the built environment material, all of these things, some of them low-hanging fruit. And Nathaniel talked about, and he had the theme going that we should not be okay with this and that. And I mean, these problems are complex. They require collaboration. I mean, we can get mad. We can think, I wish we didn't have this political leader or that. But the fact of the matter is, you have who you have, and it's incumbent upon everyone here on this webinar, as well as others, to work with the people that you have now. Now, you may be working to get rid of me or get rid of some other political leader, and that's fine. That is your right to do. But in the meantime, what kind of progress can we make with the people that we have there? Neela talked about energy audits and retrofitting. I mean, these are low-hanging fruit, and they're not painful. These things aren't painful. I mean, we've seen pain with this virus crisis. I mean, this is pain. When you shut down the economy, when people lose their jobs, when their cars are repossessed, when they're kicked out of their houses or will be kicked out, and they're building up a bill with the gas company or the power company that they're never going to be able to pay. We are in a crisis. And I think for me, as a Republican leader in Georgia, I think too many of the climate solutions that have been put forward, whether it's in the Green New Deal or some of the stuff out of the Paris Accord, too many of these things have been too painful. In other words, we haven't done all the low-hanging stuff, the non-painful stuff first. And it's too many people go to the extremes, to the extreme painful, solutions. And I just can't go there. I want to start with the low-hanging stuff, and I want to do as much as we can there. So let's dive into this. Next slide. If that doesn't get you going on the chat, I don't know what will. Next slide, please. So we have the ability, go ahead and fill the slide, if you will. Thank you. There's several different animations. We have the ability to compel the power company because that's how the 1991 Integrated Resource Planning legislation passed by a Democratic legislature, signed by a Democratic governor. That's how it works. It's never been amended. So it is a way to plan. It's why we don't need the Green New Deal in Georgia, because we have something that works. And this has allowed us to get another 2,000 megawatts of utility scale solar this past summer. As we've made that decision, we've added another 210 of DG. Initially, it's solar avoided costs, but we've added net metering to our state. That's a great change. We're going to have a lot of utility scale batteries. We're experimenting with those now. Georgia Tech had the very first one, a microgrid that we created with the power company. We've got a Second Life EV pilot project, and there's a poll running right now. I'm on my fourth electric car. We've had a lot of lithium-ion batteries, frankly, that have been removed from cars that still have a lot of life left. We need to utilize those. And then we've just closed another 5 coal units that will be closing because they've become uneconomic. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we are, we're making progress. It's not as, it's not maybe as quickly as you want. And part of what happens when you have a conservative like me in office is that I go slower. I mean, it's not that I'm slow because I'm old. I'm slow because I'm conservative. And that is, and if you've never read Russell Kirk's book, The Conservative Mind, at least read that chapter to understand why conservatives do things gradually, not in an extreme way, not drastically. And I think even though you might not become a conservative, at least you won't be banging your head against the wall, wondering why are they doing it like this. We have added net metering, again, with limits. We didn't just say, oh, we're going to have net metering unlimited. We're saying 32 new megawatts. We're going to cap it at 5,000. Why? Because we don't make extreme changes at the commission. And you have 5 Republicans on the commission. And so, in fact, every constitutional officer in the state of Georgia is a Republican. I don't know that they've all read Russell Kirk's Conservative Mind. I mean, I have 3 degrees from the University of Georgia. I'm a thoughtful person, but I am a conservative. I have 7 children. I'm pro-life. I mean, I'm everything you probably don't want to be, if you're a liberal in our country. But I am moving us forward in part because I'm an evangelical, because I believe that God has given me a responsibility to care for our planet, our environment. And I'm doing that in a way that's, I guess, this congruent, and true to my own faith and values. Next slide. So as we move forward, electric vehicles are, you can go to the next slide, please. Electric vehicles are important, and you see the chart on lithium-ion batteries. The price is coming down. So you can expect to see a lot more batteries, and these batteries are in containers, like shipping containers, and they're stacked up, they're connected. They require, by the way, a lot of air conditioning to stay cool. We don't have a great recycling model for lithium-ion. To all the technology students out there right now, we need this. Nathaniel mentioned Plant Vogtle. Plant Vogtle is operating today. 9,000 workers, less about 100 that have been quarantined. We've had 1 positive out there, but we're moving forward. This plant, yes, they're being safe. Yes, we've got a medical tent out there. We've got a lot of testing going on, and we're taking great precautions. But we're moving forward. One, we need this carbon-free energy that's set to come on in November 2021 and 2022. Next slide, please. You saw the cooling towers at Plant Vogtle. There's been controversy certainly around it, but we spent a lot of money on it, and I'm certainly not going to, knowing the law, that if we cancel the plant, you're going to pay for it anyway. I'm certainly not going to back up and cancel it. And so we've pressed forward, been a great challenge. So next slide, please. So I'm optimistic for the future, and I do hope one day that we don't have to have emission stickers in our state because we're out, or in our metro area because we're out of attainment with the Environmental Protection Agency. I want to change that. Moving Plant McDonough from a coal plant over there on the Chattahoochee to a natural gas plant has done wonders for Atlanta air quality. There will be a day, I think, when all our coal ash is eventually sold off into the building industry, put into cement blocks, into parking decks, into bridge structures, and rendering it inert. So I think there are very positive things coming down the line. But, and the reason that I'm on this presentation and that I often find myself in a lion's den is because I believe collaboration is very important. That if you and I have a relationship, then we can talk. You can persuade me. You can invite me out to see this or that, or bring me over to check and see this experiment because I am persuadable. But if you're throwing stones at officials and you don't have the ability to have a relationship with them, you're probably not going to change their mind because you don't have a relationship with them. It's so important. The slide there talks about decarbonizing transportation and charging vehicles, and this is the argument I'm making to Republicans right now, that charging vehicles at home at night provides better grid utilization and puts downward pressure on rates. In other words, as you try to persuade Republicans about electric cars, forget about environmental arguments. Talk to them about this. Say, sir, did you know, ma'am, did you know that when people charge EVs at home overnight, that it provides better grid utilization and actually lowers everybody's rates? It uses an in-state fuel. These vehicles weigh less impact on our highways. And every 1% of petroleum-based miles traveled in Georgia that is displaced by electric vehicles is approximately $201 million that will remain in our state. These are great economic development arguments. And so when you're talking to a Republican, hey, speak Republican, right? The Georgia Solar Association, they've learned to speak Republican. That doesn't mean they're being untrue to their values or how they really feel. They just learned to speak Republican. They've become fluent, and they've persuaded us on things. Next slide. So I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. And as we continue to work together, and I'm going to end right here, Cobb EMC, Peter Hanselman is a very conservative guy out in a very conservative area, and you can overnight charge your car on the Cobb EMC system for $0. So there's a lot of clever things going on, a lot of opportunities. Hats off to Cobb EMC, to me, the most innovative utility in the state on many fronts. So thank you very much, Dr. Brown.
Well, thanks for all that you do and for all the speakers for their careers in this field. We're so blessed to have these superstars here to share what they know with us, and look forward to solutions and meeting our 2030 goal for carbon neutrality. I think we could take a few of the questions now that are being asked in our chat, or take a look at our polls. Maybe I could tee up one question for any of you, really. And that has to do with what we should be doing to prepare for recovery from this crisis in a way that will leverage and accelerate our climate solutions. So I know we're in a situation now of high unemployment, and we need to rev up the economy and juice it up with some activity that's labor intensive, in my opinion, energy efficiency being a prime example. So many people can be put to productive use right away. No need to go out into the laboratory and find out that answer. We've got it already. What do you think? What should we tee up over the next few months so that we're ready, that when people are back and able to work again? Anyone have ideas for us to share, or anyone in the chat?
I've just unmuted all the panelists.
Marilyn, I think one of the things that Southface is working on is energy efficiency in retrofits in existing buildings, and that includes residences. We do a lot of training with the Weatherization Assistance Program network around the Southeast to help the weatherization providers learn the skills they need to go into homes and weatherize them to improve energy efficiency and improve indoor air quality. And I think that with the amount of federal funding from this administration that's winding up in weatherization programs, meaning it's increased over the last several years, surprisingly, that there is an enormous resource, a financial resource available for us to get out there and start addressing, I think, energy inequity with folks who are vulnerable and low to moderate income families. And all of that infrastructure is in place. And there are weatherization crews sitting at home, maybe even listening to this today, waiting to get back to work. But there are lots of training organizations, not just Southface, around the Southeast that can deploy those people within weeks to begin leveraging that federal resource to improve weatherization. So I think that's something that gets directly to people. It improves their living circumstances. It reduces their utility burdens, which is how much money you spend on a monthly basis of your income on energy, natural gas, water, things like that. So I think that's a readily deployable solution.
On the rooftop solar side, too, there's a real shortage of trained, not just engineers, but I guess they call them racking and glass specialists and CAD CAM designers. These are not. These are jobs that you can get certified in, and maybe we should be using the next month or two to try to bring people into the workforce through certification programs in the energy fields, efficiency and solar. I keep hearing about the shortages of trained labor for these, key areas of our clean economy. Is Southface still? Yes, Nathaniel, you probably have some views on that.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I think that is the best way to go, but I think we have to facilitate the demand for their labor. And I think that there are opportunities for policymakers to create the demand for the increased labor that we could help to facilitate through workforce development. Also, I think, again, if we look at history and look at how we got here as it relates to COVID-19, there are particular hotspots, right, that have been affected by COVID-19 in a disproportionate fashion. I guarantee you that if you overlaid those communities with the energy burden challenges that we face in our country and other challenges that we face, I guarantee you that those communities would be congruent with where the hotspots are for COVID-19. So is there a way for us to have a more focused place-based approach around energy efficiency and really work to facilitate not just green transition, but also jobs through that transition? And last but certainly not least, I mean, individuals may ask, well, where, because we need capital. I think if there's a way to amortize the investments that we've made in these large corporations to keep them from going under, and actually utilize and actually give the public who have invested in those companies a return on that investment in some way that could manifest itself in some type of trust fund or some type of infrastructure bank, we could finally have, and I think that was one of the big mistakes of the real estate bailout, that we provided resources to the real estate community and banks, but didn't really ask for a return on the investment that the public made on saving those banks. I think that we have to think differently about how we utilize our money this time. And there's an opportunity to actually accumulate not only a return on investment for the public, but also capital that can be used to drive the demand for jobs in the communities that are being hit hardest by not only COVID-19, but also the challenges that we're facing around climate change.
Yeah, I think you're right that in order to attract new labor to these energy fields that require some training, they need a commitment that there's a job there at the end of that cycle. And if some of these large corporations could be worked with to make that kind of a commitment, that would really be helpful. Yeah.
One of the things that I think we need to use is just a little bit of logic, and that is that we put so much attribution for solar, and we almost worship it, where helping a person with energy efficiency and getting insulation in their house and getting the envelope tightened, that's more important than getting solar on your roof. And I think we need to communicate to people that there are things that they can do that will lower their energy burden. And it may not be some of the cool, shiny objects that they've heard about. There's nothing cool about insulation, but it clearly lowers your bill. And so one of the comments in chat was, how do we get landlords? How do we incentivize landlords to upgrade rental homes for people who are, essentially paying way more for their power than they should be, because it's all going out the window and the ceiling. And I mean, that is a very important question, and it's a problem we need to solve, because that's low-hanging fruit. We have a lot of rental homes in Atlanta. We have a lot of old homes in Atlanta. We saw this in Savannah and Kim mentioned it when we went down to Savannah and went door to door, and the Harambe House was a part of that. Ed Gresham and his group was a part of that. A number of different organizations helped with that, and we went through and saw some very bad homes that needed work, including needing new furnaces that were putting people at jeopardy because of carbon monoxide, and gas hot water heaters that weren't working, and people that didn't have heat and were using space heaters. And those space heaters are expensive, way more expensive than running an efficient gas furnace. So, let's start with the low-hanging fruit. Let's help solve these problems.
So, Neela, one of the justifications for the energy benchmarking ordinance in the city of Atlanta was that it would help the market to behave more efficiently, and it would provide information to potential tenants about the energy efficiency of the available real estate. Has that worked? Have you seen evidence of that? Are we now at the point now of some return on investment, or do we need more mechanisms like green lease arrangements or some kind of a minimum performance requirement at point of turnover of rental property? How can we do more? Do we need to do more? Maybe it's already improving. What do you think?
So we are in our initial phases of collecting data, and I don't think we have enough data to create a full picture. We have completed 1 year of compliance, moving towards, increasing the rates of compliance from other building owners. I think that can inform the discussion moving forward of what a green real estate marketplace would look like when potential renters or potential business owners who are looking to purchase buildings would look at that data point as a bigger piece of their pie and how they evaluate decision making. And I think we just need more data to get to that point.
Marilyn, the state of Georgia has a qualified allocation process for tax credits as an incentive for developers to create affordable housing. And it's a competitive system, and there's a checklist that you go through and figure out what you want to do to compete. But one of them is high performance buildings or green building certification. Mm-hmm. And so Southface and other organizations in the state have worked with developers to certify these affordable units that come online. Owners have to own them for 10 years, and so it's in their interest to have well-built developments. They're gonna, their value is gonna be retained by occupancy, but they're higher performing. And so we have a really nice stock of housing, affordable housing in the state that is actually higher performing, and it's all based on an incentive system. So I think that that's a way of cajoling the marketplace without, introducing new legislation or requirements or sticks, but by using carriage creatively. And I think there are lots of ways that we could do that on both commercial and residential side.
I think Allison has just put up this great chart of our 21 high potential solutions, and one of those, it's under electricity generation, is called demand response, and that's where you also consider the hour of the day that you're shifting your load. So if you can cut consumption on a sunny summer afternoon, that's worth a whole lot more than cutting consumption at midnight, that evening when there's an excess of supply. I think the state of Georgia Public Service Commission has committed to invest more in demand response initiatives with the integrated resource plan that was just recently passed. I think that this is a way to help the energy efficiency movement to be more strategic and focusing on investments that hit the hardest on the hours that are most important to the utility to reduce consumption. What do you think, Tim? Is there something, anything you can share with us that we can anticipate going forward over the next few years? It looks good in the demand response arena.
We've got Jamie Barber on the call, works with renewables and energy efficiency at the commission, and she thinks about this stuff every single day. Brian Jacobs is on the call, and I really think Brian and his organization were influential in getting Commissioner McDonald to increase, in his motion, to increase energy efficiency in our state. And that, Brian and his group came in long before, we were teeing up a vote. I mean, he had a very thoughtful presentation, and they're not bomb throwers at the commission. They build relationships. I keep talking about how important relationships are, but it's true in politics, right? Relationships and trust, that's the currency. And so to not acknowledge that is to simply be naive, in my opinion. So I think Brian and them are looking at, okay, where can we go from here? And it's a matter of, Dr. Brown, of getting a lot of different stakeholders signing on to the same thing. Quantity matters in politics, not just a single voice, multiple voices. It matters, and we need a number of people saying, hey, this is a good way forward.
Allison, are you able to engage any of our other participants, like Jamie Barber, or you mentioned Brian Jacobs? Is he on the phone? I see Michael Channon here is online, and he and I have talked about this need for more labor in the solar industry. Any way we can get them talking, or how's that done?
Certainly, we can invite attendees to join the conversation. So there's a way you can raise your hand, and then we can unmute you. But I also want to call attention to some of the most popular questions in the chat. And it seems like we need to clear up a few misconceptions. So a lot of people in the Q&A, are asking about forestry and wood and biomass, and whether that is a renewable resource or not. And the reason I put up the drawdown slides is because a lot of people are also just asking questions about what are the best solutions. So here's a snapshot of what is best for Georgia, and note that wind is not on there. I don't know if we need to talk about that too much, but that was a question. And biomass energy is also not on there, so anyone who is concerned about that. But if anyone on the panel wants to speak about how we can create, there was a specific question from Vicki about alternative economic models of forestry and how we can truly make that a clean, renewable resource. So if anybody wants to respond to that, and yeah, we'll take it from there. So a lot of questions on wood.
Yeah, let me hop in on the biomass. I saw Vicki's earlier comment, and certainly I think in the U.S. biomass is not considered renewable. Obviously, the Kyoto Protocol and what's going on in the U.K., they have essentially replaced coal in many instances, and I've been there to plants, and they've replaced coal with with southern yellow pine wood pellets from Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. And they've turned off scrubbers because of it. So, it's, from a CO2 perspective, probably, about the same. Dr. Brown can speak to that. But here's my concern is that when we have a timber crew go through and harvest a pine plantation, whether that's the Sidell, plantation down in Albany or any of the other ones around the state that's corporately owned, these folks grow this timber, they harvest it, and then they replant and grow it again for 15, 20, 25 years. But when you clear the timber and you have the tops left and the branches, and it looks like a bomb went off in the field. And without the wood chip plants, and we don't have that many, but without that, there is no value proposition to do anything other than let that stuff lay out in the field and become methane. Or what's worse is when they bring bulldozers in and pile it up and pour diesel and kerosene on it and burn it in the field itself. So I think the way that we're doing it at the Procter & Gamble plant, at a number of others, by burning wood chips, it's not perfect, but it's better than the alternative, in my opinion.
Well, and I think there are advances in wood technology that are going to allow us to divert more and more to building products. You've got many of these mass timber elements or glulam elements where you can take these smaller pieces of wood and you can use them for building materials. And so I think we're not there yet where it's a viable alternative to the amount of limbs and roots that are harvested and left to the side, but I think it can get there as the demand for those products grows. So there's a chance for forestry and lumber products to evolve in that direction. They're great at eliminating waste. There's virtually no waste in forestry these days as it is. It's just sort of where's it going and what are the outcomes of that use that are important.
So those of you who have followed the Drawdown Georgia project know that biomass power was on our list there under electricity generation and is no longer. Keep in mind that our high potential solutions are those that we think are ready right now over the next decade. We are just not sure that we know how to scale up a large scale biomass power generation solution in Georgia. There is the torrefaction and the possibility of using some greater carbon sequestration while you're doing your power generations, a lot of options that may prove fruitful, but just like wind, I don't think we're there right now. We still have a few roadblocks ahead of us. So that was one of the reasons that we did push it off to the next decade as for reconsideration. Lots of issues with it at this point.
So we also had another really popular question for Nathaniel based on one of the poll questions. The poll asked, do you support a moratorium for the utility shutoff during this pandemic? And 20% of the people said they were unsure. So maybe we need a little more explanation on what that means and what the consequences are. And specifically, what happens when that moratorium ends? Do they have to pay all of the back bills? How is that really going to affect people? And then a follow-up is, what are the other ways that we can really bring equity and justice to the center?
I think all of those are really good questions. And to answer your question, it all really, in terms of the moratorium, depends on how the policy is designed. Right now, there are individuals in parts of the city of Atlanta that are paying well over the percentage you would want for their utility costs. Individuals are losing their jobs. In particular, vulnerable communities depend a great deal on hourly wage jobs. essential, jobs that support the essential economy. Many of those jobs are being lost temporarily, hopefully, because of COVID-19. Where do the resources come from to pay those bills? And unfortunately, soon their bills will be going up. And so even though we see as an option the work that is required around energy efficiency, energy audits, of course, are free, but the amount that could be required to make those homes efficient will cost something. And many of those communities cannot afford that. So, as we have conversations in other places around the country are having conversations about moratoriums, it really depends on the policy. It really depends on what type of policies can be developed, of course, with the support of the Public Service Commission and our utility. And to me, that leads into another point that I wanted to make sure that I elevated. And that is, while this conversation about a clean energy future and a clean energy transition is definitely and has to be built on science, from our perspective as an organization, it is also a moral imperative that we do what needs to be done. To my friends on the right who are Republicans, I always have to remind them that they do not have a monopoly on morality. And as a Christian, a Christian which I am, I am just as much committed to making sure that after a child is born, that they can live in a community, that they can reach their full potential, than others who may be committed to making sure that they have an opportunity to be born. Both of them are connected, and both of them are critical and important. And so from our perspective, it is about a moral case, of course, a science case as well. We spend a lot of time on the science side. But I think that if we're able to find, trillions of dollars to ensure that certain segments of our population have an opportunity to make it past this economic downturn, we can do the same for communities who are already in many ways experiencing many of the challenges that COVID-19 has realized way before COVID-19 unfortunately realized itself. And so I think it's something that has to be thought through, and we have to make sure that we have strong and productive conversations with our elected officials and begin to ask the hard questions about what is the role of our private utility and what role should they be playing to ensure that their customers are positioned to benefit from the revenue that they and the good credit rating now that is being protected in ways that they can benefit from that as well. So, that's my 2 cents about it. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts about it.
Yeah, today at the commission, via Zoom, we extended the moratorium on cutoffs indefinitely. And so Georgia Power cannot cut anyone off until they come back and ask our permission. So that will go on for as long as we feel like it needs to go on. And so we are seeing people in crisis. We don't want anybody, including prepay customers. We have 82,000 prepay customers, mostly low income. And last Thursday at our committee, I said, let's make sure we include prepay with this, because with prepay, when you go to zero, you don't get cut off. You're finished. So it's different than a regular disconnect, because you can be instantly reconnected by just putting $10 back on your bill. But I wanted to make sure that those 82,000 prepay customers who very well may go to zero, that doesn't turn them off. And so they're going to be protected. What happens to folks in a month when they're way behind on their gas bill and electric bill? Well, if they're low income, they can go to the Salvation Army one time per year, and they can get up to $500. So some people maybe that was in arrears, only 200 or 300 didn't qualify for help from Salvation Army. Now they will qualify and they can get that money, paid toward their bill. We have an abundant amount of money for gas customers who have a balance of over $500 right now. I mean, the money's available. I mean, it could happen tomorrow, just like that. They could get that money. But folks aren't asking, they don't know. That's something that PSE and Sierra Club and Harambe and a lot of our organizations need to get the word out to folks that if you are low income and you're behind on your gas bill, you can get some help. And we want to make sure that they get that.
Great.
I know you also
really,
you also have a program at the public service. Well, the Georgia Power has a program that offers smart thermostats to. I don't remember the number. It was quite an impressive goal for the penetration of that technology over the next couple of years. I think that that's a technology that pays for itself in terms of educating users to know the repercussions of their behavior, how to use energy wisely and be smart about it. They should be given away. I don't know if they are being given away, but they ought to be placed at no cost in homes of low income households.
And no, they're not free, but they're greatly reduced. I'll have Jamie Barber, my staffer, post on the chat just the details of the program if you. And clearly, these thermostats do eventually pay for themselves. I think they're $100 or something for a Nest thermostat, but prepaid customers, this is the big surprise. Prepaid customers save about 11% over against what they did before they were prepaid customers. So there's just something about getting a message prepaid with your balance and thinking about energy, right?
Yep.
Thinking about it. So, I drive an electric car, so I think about energy all the time, right? I'm an energy regulator. Of course I think about it, but a lot of people don't think about it until they get their bill. And so getting a text every day is helpful to getting a person to go, wait a second, I got this light on. I need to turn that off, and I'm wasting this. And so it's just a great reminder, and prepay is a wonderful program to do that.
Allison, did you find another interesting question for us?
Yes, we've had a lot of votes asking more questions for Tim here. So related to how customers pay, Norman was asking about the Pay As You Save program that was going to be filed on April 1st. Is that going forward for energy efficiency?
Yeah, so the Pay As You Save program was something I heard about at the Verge conference in Santa Clara. I was out there, and a couple of Georgia folks, Michelle Moore and Allie Kelly, said, "Hey, Tim, you gotta come find out about this." And they brought the guy who does the EMC in Arkansas to me, and he told me about the program, and wow, we should try this in Georgia. So we went back and we got together a number of stakeholders, kind of planned it out over a 2-year period, and it got into the IRP for a pilot of 500 customers. These will be in Atlanta and Athens. And these customers are going to get up to about $10,000 worth of, improvements on their home, and it will just be paid back through the tariff, and we guarantee it to be a reduction in their bill. And I have made sure that equipment will be warranted the entire period that their home is in the Pay As You Save program. So, because the last thing I wanted to happen was for the thing to go out on them in 7 years and them still have a year to pay on it. So we want to make sure they're protected, and it's going to be a great way for people to save money. And if it's successful, when we do the IRP again in a couple years, maybe we move from 500 to 5,000, and then in another 3 years to 50,000. I mean, we want it to be successful. Let's design the programs to make it work, and I think it can be a great benefit.
As I recall from some other pay-as-you-save programs, including a few in TVA, which we launched when I was a regulator there was no way to income qualify participants in that program. The Ag Department, which funded some of the pay-as-you-save programs over the first few years, did not allow that. Is there an income qualification that you're able to use to be sure you target the pay-as-you-save to the people who need it most?
Yes, it is exclusively a low-income program. There were folks that wanted to make it wider than that, but to Georgia Power's credit, they wanted it to be exclusively low income. And we're going to have a third party group that handles this for them. So it's going to be run, as a very efficient type of program, professional. And so we'll see if it's successful. I hope it is. If it fails, then we won't do it again, and that will be unfortunate. So I think it's success is going to allow us to help more people.
Well, we're going to be watching. It sounds very promising. Yeah. Good. Allison, you picking out any other questions for us?
Yes. So the next one comes from Kevin. Sounds like we've got good participation from Savannah, and everyone is excited that Savannah recently passed their 100% clean, safe, and renewable energy goal. And the question is specifically, what resources are available in terms of consulting, training, technical assistance, or help with securing funding through the Georgia Drawdown program for a city like Savannah as they're trying to move towards that? Or what do we hope we might see come out of this?
Well, we are interested in.
Tough one.
Yeah, that's a tough one. We don't have at this point the Drawdown Georgia project doesn't have grants for helping to launch solutions once we've got them all kind of scoped out and ready to go. Although, of course, that's what we want to see as the next phase, scaling everything up and helping to make that happen. So I guess just stay tuned as we try to mobilize resources around these good prospects, and also working with partners that are wanting to move forward, because there's nothing better than being able to help a community that's already committed but just needs a little extra assistance. So, and of course Kim is there in Savannah often, or at least digitally, virtually these days. We have good connections to the Savannah community. Yeah.
And as a follow-up to that, I believe people were noting that Tim may have mentioned that we should kind of go slowly in our approach. And I think there was some requests for clarification on that, because a lot of us feel that this is very urgent, and the Georgia Drawdown was looking at a 2030 timeline, and that's what this Power Dialog is all about as well, the 2030 timeline. So I just want to maybe ask our panelists again if they could all think of that strong takeaway when we close for what is the solution to really create a better climate in the next 10 years? How do we work in this somewhat short 10-year timeline?
Let me jump in on this, because as Kim said at the top of this, that it's a joint effort. And let me give you an example. There are Fortune 500 companies that are coming into our state that want renewable energy powering their facility, or they come up with a formula maybe that's going to power their facility plus all of their operations over here, or maybe even representing, the power usage of their employees. So there's all kind of ways that these companies do this. And so they go to the utility and say, we want to do this. Can you help us? So there you see this joint effort, and they're willing to, maybe they're willing to pay a little bit more for a power purchase agreement that gives them those attributes. So cities like Savannah, Atlanta, Augusta, many others that are passing these resolutions, I think it's incumbent upon them to fire up their own citizens and to be a cheerleader, so to speak, the politicians, and say, look, in order for us to accomplish this goal, this is what we're going to have to do. We're going to work with the utility, with the PSC, and we're going to have them build, as a result of our resolution or our ordinance, we're going to have them build solar over here to power all of our city buildings, plus all of this, and we're going to give all the companies that are with our jurisdiction an opportunity to do the same. That kind of joint effort and cooperation might enable us to move forward. But I don't think we can just say, oh, Public Service Commission, why aren't you doing more? Governor, why aren't you doing more? It takes all of these folks working together to be able to justify the additional cost or the additional expense or the additional land use to do this. And cities have a very important role to play, but it's more than just passing some little resolution. It's way more than that. And they need to step up and do those things in order to make it happen, in my opinion.
Well, don't you think, Allison, that pertinent to today's dialogue, students can make an incredible difference? They are all sustainability curricula these days. And when they come out of college with their degrees, they're going to want to situate themselves and be a stimulant with whatever organization hires them. I really think we're going to be able to help jumpstart a lot of these new business opportunities in the clean tech arena by having students always asking, once they're out there in the real world with their first job, how can we do it better? What's the secret to that life cycle least cost impact to the environment? You know how to calculate it, and you'll bring that lens and that calculator with you.
So really, Dr. Brown,
yeah.
Brown, if I may, I would actually like to add another layer to your comments. And for me, is someone who has been engaged in issues of social justice for the majority of my life. I think it's also very important for me to speak to the students and young people about the importance of them not being complacent and not being slow in your understanding around the urgency of the situation. Many of the policies that have benefited marginalized communities from the Civil Rights Movement, Voting Rights Act, and other things came about because people were not patient. They decided to work together and begin the process of pushing an agenda that may be uncomfortable to some, but the right thing to do. And so for the young, people in particular on this call, yes, it's about personal responsibility and doing what you can to make sure that your footprint is as minimal as possible. But it's also your responsibility to make sure that your elected officials understand where you stand and do all you can to work with organizations to ensure that the policies and budgets are a reflection of your values. So I started my talk earlier by saying that policy is a reflection of the values of people in power. The question that I would ask you all on this call, are the policies that you're dealing with right now in the communities that you care about, the policies that you see around climate that are being pushed, are they a reflection of your values, or do you want more, or do you think we deserve more? If are the budgets and ways that resources are being allocated as it relates to the support of vulnerable populations, ensuring that by 2030 we'll have a chance to live as human beings on this planet, is that a reflection of the values, of your values? If you say no, then it's not just about personal responsibility, it's also about public policy, and it's about you taking on the mantle that other young people have taken since America has existed, of standing up for the least of these and doing what you can to ensure that all people are valuable in God's sight and have a chance to reach their full potential. That is your responsibility. And I wanted to make sure that I said that. One of the things that we are doing as an organization is that we have an initiative called Keep That Same Energy, where we're working with colleges around the state, educating them and engaging them around energy justice issues and racial equity issues. And if you're interested in learning more about Keep That Same Energy, I would again encourage you to reach out to the Partnership for Southern Equity. We're working at our historically Black colleges and universities, as well as Agnes Scott and other institutions. And so take on that responsibility of leadership. We're waiting on you to do that. And as an organization, as well as other organizations, we're here to support you in doing that.
Nathaniel, I really like that quote. Policies are a reflection of the values of people in power. That's so impactful. And we have been working with the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, who has spearheaded a survey of views across Georgia on climate change. And they discovered that there's a strong majority, of course, that believes that the climate is changing, and also a good majority that has concluded that people are the principal cause. But when they're asked, do you talk about climate change? Often they say no. When asked why not, they say because we put it in the category of politics and religion. It can get too testy. It can be too difficult. It can lead to conflict. And I think what you're saying to Allison, at this point we're talking about students. Sorry, Allison, not meaning to pick on you in particular, but you got to get past that. You just got to be able to talk about your views. Don't put it in the closet, but bring it out. Yeah. Well, I guess stifled that conversation. Allison, what do you think?
Well, thanks to everyone for elevating the students. A few of my thoughts on that is that we've been kind of disillusioned by some of the, typical channels. I see tons of young people getting involved in Sierra Club and signing petitions. There's all these, group me's around the university that are sharing tons of petitions all the time. And we're seeing that we're still kind of not being heard. And so there is now this movement, Fridays for Future, that's actually protesting schools on Fridays, started by Greta Thunberg. And there's a small group that does it every Friday at Georgia Tech. And they've even tried to continue it virtually online by sharing their posters and keeping each other motivated. And one thing I noticed is that there's, this small group of people that are super excited and engaged, and then a lot of people that are, too busy. We hear all these people that are like, oh, they're too busy for that. They have other priorities or concerns. And so I'm not really sure where the question is in that, but it's a challenge sometimes to know where the appropriate time and space is to do those things and to push. And I just want to say I am trying to promote more people to speak online, but it seems like we're having a difficulty. So if you do see a green bar that pops up at the top of your screen inviting you to become a presenter, that's how you can speak out loud. So Jamie and Vicky, I've sent you an invitation to speak, but you have to accept that, and then you can turn that on. And Alex is saying in the chat he's one of the co-organizers. I'd love to hear from Alex or Crystal. They've been helping moderate the chat. They're both students and super concerned about the environment. And so before I turn it over to them, I'll just share a little bit about myself. What I'm doing is I'm in a program on sustainability. I decided I wanted to get another advanced degree to try to really be a leader in this field, and at the same time try to be on the ground and participate in it. And I think a lot of my peers that I talk to, we keep hoping that there's going to be these mass protests and these big, get everybody in the street and say that these things matter. But a little bit of a lack of participation that I'm not sure how to overcome. A lot of people think, we're still okay.
Well, Allison, another way that you work toward change, of course, is by being an insider. And when you take your next job with all of the tools from being a master's in sustainable energy and environmental management, you're going to have the wherewithal to be persuasive and to be definitive about impacts and opportunities. But I think you're doing the right thing. I think by getting another degree and getting that qualification. Maybe a little being out in the street, I don't know, is not so bad either, but
the apathy that Allison's talking about is true. It's probably exasperating to a lot of people on this call, trying to get your friends to care, vote, get engaged. But Nathaniel's point that policy is the reflection of people in power is a truth.
The values of people in power. It's a reflection of the
values of people in power. Yeah. And that the fact that that we live in districts made up of different people, I think it causes politicians to modify their positions, not necessarily their values, but it causes them to compromise to satisfy a certain component of their constituency. And there's nothing immoral about that, probably, right? So you may not necessarily, all of my colleagues may not necessarily like electric cars, but they voted with me to add $24 million of EVs and EV infrastructure, to Georgia Power's spend list, and they did it for whatever reason. I don't know. I'm not going to drill down too much and ask them about it. I'm just glad that they went with me on it. So politicians, we're fickle because we do want to make friends with as many people as possible. We want to satisfy as many people as possible. So it's not like I'm trying to force my values on all of you. I want to hear what is the best way forward. And if I can make a little progress on this thing over here, I consider it a good day. I don't have to get everything done to feel like I've accomplished something.
I think the city of Atlanta is very lucky to have a number of organizations like the Southface Institute and the Green Link Group and the Sierra Clubs and Vote Solar and all of these organizations that are a great place for people to go and start a career and maybe even spend decades, because these are well-heeled places. Shane, your organization is doing so much good for the metro area.
We're looking for good people too, Dr. Brown. Don't forget about it.
Oh, thank you, of course. And I didn't mean, yes. And we got some for you. Absolutely.
We pay pretty good too, if you're interested.
All right, I'll be calling you tomorrow.
It looks like Vicki has become a presenter. Did you have a question, Vicki? No? You can unmute yourself, maybe?
Yeah, Vicki, you're unmuted. Let's hear what you want to talk about.
Okay, you heard me. First of all, I'd just like to say thank everybody for all of this. I mean, this has been fabulous, really. Thank you so much. All different kinds of perspectives. But one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately that I was hoping we might incorporate a little bit into the climate crisis discussion is, we all keep talking about the return to normal. And, the old normal really wasn't working for a tremendous number of people. And I think it's time for us to begin thinking about a new normal. And, so for example, to Jane at Southface, it's like, how do we start looking at stopping the whole monocultural extractive forestry industry model and incorporating a broader, richer, deeper, sustainable system that provides habitat protection, that it provides diversity protection, that provides, all of the things. I mean, wetland forests alone in Georgia provide $67.3 billion in economic value to the state. And how do we transition our economic system and our state policy systems so that we are supporting that kind of growth as opposed to the same old that, let's face it, has brought us to exactly here. And so then to Nathaniel, my question is, along those same lines, don't we also need to look beyond just the how do we do the climate thing, but how do we enrich the economic equity lives of the communities throughout Georgia that have been hollowed out by the old normal, the box chains, the box stores that have eliminated local businesses and corner grocery stores. And I mean, they've decimated middle America and middle Georgia. And so how do we move beyond that? That's my question.
Vicki, I think Nathaniel's going to jump in here on that piece, but back to your forestry issue. When you're going to make a significant paradigm change in something, you got to have all the stakeholders engaged. You got to have landowners, the corporations who own the land, the paper business, the chamber. I mean, you're talking about significant changes, and we're not going to change that on a webinar. Certainly, it's going to take an enormous inertia to move that, and usually the status quo doesn't change unless something goes wrong with it, in my opinion, and it stops working, and then people get really mad, and then they demand it. And the politicians
who think it sort of has gone dramatically wrong, Tim?
Say that again, Vicki.
I say, don't you think it has, sort of gone dramatically wrong at this point? I mean, that's why we're all here, because the status quo is not working.
No, I don't think it's gone dramatically wrong. I mean, there are improvements that we can make and we need to continue, but I don't think it's gone dramatically wrong. So we'll have to disagree on that. We can continue to have cleaner air, cleaner water, better utilization of resources, more renewable energy. We can continue to make improvements on all of that.
But you did mention, Tim, that you thought that there was a lot of low-hanging fruit, that we could spend our time just on those options and go a long way. I do think that, Vicki, from that perspective, we're not doing well because the low-hanging fruit is so plentiful, right? It shouldn't be. We should already have harvested that. Yeah.
Or at least be supporting on a state policy level the harvesting of that.
And I also think it's important for us to acknowledge the fact that we're all connected, and that in order for us to move forward together, we have to understand that we are connected, as Dr. King said, into a network of mutuality. And, when we look at, for example, the COVID-19 situation, and not to be overly political at this point because I don't think there's any value in it. But there were repercussions in rural Georgia when Medicaid was not expanded, right? Hospitals closed, and now people are suffering in rural Georgia the same way that people are suffering in the city of Atlanta. Um, when you say, and you've made the proposition that things have gone terribly wrong, I do think it depends on who you talk to. If you're benefiting from the way things are at this point, of course you're going to say that things aren't that bad. But if you are a child in the city of Atlanta, where a poor child only has a 5% chance to rise out of poverty, or if you're in the state of Georgia where we're number 4 for income inequality, and you're on the bad side of that statistic, then things aren't necessarily working for you. And so, because we're connected, we've got to find a way to ensure that the people that I'm talking about have a chance to participate in our economy. Because whether we want to acknowledge it or not, these people are going to be our workers in the future. The numbers are changing, the demographics are shifting, and so we can't afford to leave those people behind. And, as you had made that comment about economic inclusion, it's not just about it being the right thing to do, it's about our ability to be competitive. And so this is one of the times, in my opinion, where this conversation about competitiveness and equity can come together in a way similar to the conversations that we're having around energy and a clean energy future, these intersectional opportunities for a win-win to happen. But we've got to be willing to do that. And that is where political action and engagement of our students and people who believe that change is necessary must be a part of the equation. I mean, very similar to what one of my heroes, Frederick Douglass, once said. He said that power concedes nothing without a demand. And we have to be clear about what our demand is and not be afraid to articulate that to individuals who are making our policy decisions.
Well, Nathaniel, I wanted to thank you for being the bookend of our discussion. As promised, you've had the last word, and it was a great word. Thank you so much. All of you for your contributions today. This is going to be a continuing conversation. There are lots of ways that you can stay engaged. There are some websites you can take a look at here, email you can reach out to us on, or any of us personally. But before I close out, I would like to thank the team of students and colleagues, both across Georgia and across the U.S., many of whom are listening, for launching the Power Dialog and for staying engaged. So let's keep at it and keep connected. Anything else? Bye, everybody. See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody have a great day. Thanks for being on.